Welcome to IVF This, episode 61, The Unfair Fantasy.
Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. I'm a mother to two beautiful and feral boys. I'm married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go.
Hello, my beautiful friends. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you can't tell this, but I'm actually recording this episode in my closet right now. COVID has come to the Ginn house. My husband tested positive a few days ago, and then my 7-year-old tested positive a couple of days after that. And then actually the morning of this recording, I tested positive. So we're all doing well, but we're all home together and have been for several days, and will continue to be over several days. And my husband and our children only have one volume. Drunk uncle is what we call that volume. And there is no modulation at all. So while I have a supremely talented producer, he might not be able to get all of my family noises out. So if it sneaks through, I apologize. But this is not going to stop us. So let's get into unfair fantasies. Let me start by laying a little bit of a groundwork. This is not meant to blame, shame, criticize, or judge. You know that's not what I'm about. But there are times that the most loving thing that I can do as your coach is to tell it to you straight. Most of the time, the people that love us will show us empathy, and that's about it. Now, that's not a drag on empathy. Empathy is a beautiful emotion, but it is somewhat limiting in that it doesn't really give us an opportunity to grow, to change, to see another side of something. And I steadfastly believe that what is possible for you to live a life that you love, to love yourself, even in the midst of infertility. Now, I will always hold space for the pain, the grief, and the loss during this particular journey. And I will continue to fight for a future and a life for all of you that is still beautiful and hopeful and joyful during and after this journey. Also, I get that some of you might not be in a place to hear this podcast yet. That's completely okay. As I sat down to write this, I definitely thought back and know and can fully acknowledge that this is not a message that I would have been receptive to at times. I might have thought it was insensitive or even heartless and probably told the person to F off. So if that's you, you're not ready. You don't have to take this one to heart right now. You always have the choice. You can decide this one is just not meant for me right now. You can come back later if you want, but it's always there for you. So let's get into it. What is an unfair fantasy and why do we care enough to make a whole podcast episode about it? Let me ask you this. Have you ever told yourself that if only you could get pregnant like everyone else, then things would be better? If only you didn't have that loss, that miscarriage? If only you didn't have to spend thousands, tens of thousands of dollars really, on fertility treatments, then things would be better? That you would be happier, that you wouldn't be feeling so lonely or overwhelmed right now. This is an unfair fantasy. Yes, it is true that if you got pregnant shortly after deciding you wanted to get pregnant, if you never had to do IVF, if you've never suffered a loss, then you wouldn't have any negative emotions related to infertility, IVF, losses, whatever that particular fantasy is. We can also admit that we wouldn't have any negative emotions related to the secondary loss of infertility. I call this secondary loss the loss of time, sometimes the loss of relationships or the hardships of relationships during infertility. That's what I like to call secondary losses. So we wouldn't have any negative emotions related to secondary losses. We can all admit that this is true. But while it's true, it is also incredibly unfair to ourselves. It is an unfair fantasy that we so easily fall for that somehow, if this wasn't our journey, then we wouldn't have the same negative emotion. And let me say that I personally indulged in this fantasy for years. We have this fantasy that the ratio of positive to negative emotions, that the overall quality of our lives would be objectively better if this wasn't our journey. And just like with everything, we don't just do this around infertility. We do this around so many aspects of our lives. If only we had more money, if only we had gone to a certain school or graduated, if we had a different family, or if we hadn't experienced this other trauma, if we had a different job, if we lost weight, if we had a new house or a new car, we tell ourselves, if only, then I'd be happier. If only this thing hadn't happened, or if it had happened differently, then somehow it would be better. But it's not true. It's not. And this is coming from an incredibly loving place. We are humans on this planet, and part of being human means that we will experience pain. We will experience loss. Negative emotions are necessary because they give us context for positive emotions. Negative emotions are inescapable and truly a valuable part of our lives. If we didn't understand sadness, we couldn't conceptualize or understand happiness. We have to have both. The human life, the human existence was meant for all of it. But there is a big part of us that doesn't want to feel that negative emotion. We don't want to experience it. We don't think it's supposed to be there. We associate it with danger and all these terrible things. And so we tell ourselves that it shouldn't be there. And we fantasize that somehow if life were different, there wouldn't be so much negative emotion. If life were different, it would be better. We would be better. And we look at our external circumstances. It's an unfair fantasy that we tell ourselves that if only this hadn't happened, we would no longer be human. We would no longer have the human emotional experience. But we weren't meant to have a life free of loss, of sadness, of loneliness, of overwhelm, of fear, of anger. We were meant to have a life that includes all of those things. All of those things are part of living the human life. They would still be a part of your human life, even if you weren't on this journey. Even if you had never had to go through IVF, even if you'd never experienced a loss, you would still have negative emotions. You would still have challenges. You would still have ups and downs. So please consider the impact on your life of this unfair fantasy. It's like we're driving down the highway and we're looking for an off-ramp. We're like, I don't want to be human anymore. I don't want to feel this crap. I don't want to have negative emotions, so let me just find any off-ramp I can. We look backwards and we blame our life experience as the cause. So please stop believing the story that you have that your life would have been better had you not been on this journey. It's not. It wouldn't have been. Your life would have been different, for sure, different. But it's not that it would have been better. You would still be human. Your brain would still have a negativity bias built in. It would still want to focus on the gaps instead of the gains. It would still experience negative emotions. They would just be about different things in life. And I know that lots of people would agree with you when you say that your life would have been better if it wasn't for this journey. I mean, let's be honest, pretty much everybody in the infertility community. But what I want to offer you is that choosing to believe it, choosing to hold on to this fantasy is not helping you. If we keep entertaining this unfair fantasy, then what we really do is tie ourselves to the past. We tie ourselves to the pain and to the suffering that we are experiencing now, and it just continues to grow and thrive in us. It's almost like we guarantee our pain, we guarantee our suffering that we're experiencing now will just continue to stay with us. And I don't want that for you. This is not a normal that you have to settle for. So the idea that your current suffering is caused by infertility or loss is really only true to the extent that you keep believing it. Are you with me on that one? If you keep thinking this, you've not done anything wrong, at all, again, I want to reiterate how incredibly normal this is, but I want you to consider giving yourself permission to put this thought down, to see it for what I believe it is, which is inaccurate and completely unfair to yourself. Inaccurate and unfair to the life that is in front of you. This is just the part of you talking that doesn't want to feel negative emotion. I have it too. We can love that part of ourselves. We can embrace what that means to be human. We can stop assuming that the grass would have been greener because it doesn't help us. Now, if you've listened this far and you still want to punch me in the face, that's okay. It's okay. I have thick skin. I can take it. And I probably would have said it to myself at one point. But I really want you to consider, what if what I've just told you could be true? What if what I've told you might be helpful? What if believing that your life would have been better if you hadn't been on this journey is actually making things harder for you instead of easier? What if believing that is actually taking you farther and farther away from the life you want instead of moving you closer to it? Again, as with everything I bring on this podcast, you can choose it or not. There's no wrong choice. If you're not quite there, that is completely understandable. I wasn't there for a long time. But I think even taking a moment to consider it as a possibility, you've already opened up your mind to alternatives, to different ways of doing things, a different way to continue on this journey. So that is what I have for you, my beautiful friends. Have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.